Our next speaker is Justin Smith. Justin is founder of Inside Network, the publishers of Inside Facebook and Inside Social Games. Inside Network was founded in 2006 and is the only company dedicated to producing market research on the Facebook platform and the social gaming industry. The team is based in Palo Alto and in San Francisco. Please welcome Justin Smith.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Today, I've been asked to give an overview of the state of the social gaming industry in a very brief time, so I'm going to attempt to do the best that I can and as quickly as we can, and then open it up for questions if we have time at the end. Thanks for your interest, Steve. My name is Justin Smith. Just by way of introduction, we basically at Inside Network spend our time doing two things. One, analyzing Facebook, and two, following the social gaming industry. We've been running our sites for about 4 years and have recently begun publishing a series of market research reports on the evolution of the social gaming space, which, in our view, kind of from our background, started primarily within the framework of the Facebook ecosystem, but is now, of course, becoming a much broader, it can encompass a much broader set of platforms and services today. And in a few weeks, we'll be having our first conference, Inside Social Apps. Hope to see you there. So just a brief overview of the size of the social gaming market today. Obviously, most of what we consider social games today, or at least what I consider social games kind of in our work, didn't really exist 3 years ago. The first iteration of these games were things like vampire biting and things that were primarily based on spamming your friends and recruiting more people to join your army to be at the top of the leaderboard. Over the course of time, we saw the evolution of better game dynamics. 2008 saw the beginning of kind of people going the route of trying to monetize through virtual goods instead of through advertising. And of course, the last couple of years have been a very fast whirlwind of evolution along those lines. We've seen much faster growth than I think anyone expected, including the market leaders, such that we think there was about $500 million done purely in social games transactions last year, conservatively up to 800 to $1 billion this year. And the interesting thing about this is that while certainly a lot of the developers are somewhere between here and San Jose, many of the customers are actually around the world. And we're seeing growth and monetization in every continent around the world, and most of the companies that are leading the market today are thinking about themselves as operating global services, providing many of which have started local studios, or doing very relatively advanced localization in terms of how they both deliver their game experiences as well as how they monetize in different markets around the world. Just to put this in context in terms of kind of how most people are probably familiar with many of the larger game companies in Asia, although this is a big trend in North America and in the West. Obviously, the virtual goods market is much larger and more mature in the East, and many of the companies who have been very successful in Asia are starting to move over to the Facebook platform and other types of social gaming platforms now that they've seen that their infrastructure and their operational processes actually apply pretty well to what's going on today, for the same reason that many of the traditional gaming developers and publishers have been slower to adapt. So today we've seen the emergence of a few players who are leading the market, who are certainly have established some scale and are using that to their advantage. Zynga has 700, maybe 800 or 900 employees today. Probably did a couple $100 million in revenue last year, growing 50 to 70%, very quickly growing, and is very focused on not only game development but also really on operations and figuring out how to scale an organization beyond kind of the point at which many of the smaller developers kind of hit a ceiling. Over the course of the last couple of years, there have been many independent developers, one and two man, one team shops that have gotten up to the 1, 2, 3 million MAU mark, but just aren't setting themselves up for growth beyond that because they haven't thought about the the infrastructure and the ways that they'll need to scale not only their core technology services, but also customer service and billing and so forth. So Zynga, Playfish, and Playdom have really done an outstanding job of that, and that has played a major role in their ability to grow. Playfish, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with as well, was recently acquired by EA about 3 months ago in a very interesting transaction. Has also established very strong IP with several of their games, and has been very focused on monetization over the course of their life as well. Playdom, which also has over 300, maybe 350 employees now, has established a foothold on Facebook after being primarily successful on MySpace in the early days, and has is itself doing over $50 million in revenue just last year. So there are other players that have other types of companies who have actually moved into the space, who have either started from scratch and have been able to grow very quickly, or who have maybe readjusted from adjacent products or strategies in the last couple of years. A couple of the largest U.S. players are CrowdStar, Rockyou, and Slide, and these are each very different businesses, but they have each made a big move into the space over the course of the last 12 months. CrowdStar, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, has been probably the most successful example of a company that has been able to grow from a very small team with primarily quiz apps to a very large and well monetizing developer of quality games over the course really of the last 9 months. Rockyou, which I'm sure you're all familiar with as well, has a long history of doing content distribution and distributing widgets across a variety of publisher sites, as well as operating a very large ad network within the Facebook platform specifically. And it has also been focused on games, but it has also still been focused on its monetization services, which makes it kind of an interesting case. And Slide, which was long the number one developer by total reach on the Facebook platform through its very successful early generation applications like Super Poke and things of games like apps like that, has drastically shifted its strategy from an advertising and more media focused model to a virtual goods model over the course of the last couple of years, and has also been one of the companies that's been playing a larger role in the development of its own direct payments implementation, but also working with Facebook along with other developers to help them with their rollout of credits. And one of the most interesting trends that I've observed over the last several months is that there's been a lot of interest from abroad, particularly from China, and many developers who have been very successful on RenRen and other popular social networking platforms in China have basically started porting and localizing their apps to Facebook, which is pretty interesting. And obviously, Facebook is blocked in China, and so they're not able to develop for their local market, but they're actually developing for other Asian and Western markets, which to me is a very interesting sign. Here are some of the examples that you may have heard of. Riku, like 5 Minutes. And one of the more interesting examples of a firm that's adopting a pure publisher model is 6waves, which is basically recruiting local developers in the region and then just helping them distribute and monetize their games around the world. And I expect this to be something we see a lot more of in the coming year. We haven't. Most people who have been building apps on Facebook haven't really thought about the difference between developers and publishers, and we're definitely seeing more of a publishing model come out now as cross promotion and the ability to drive traffic through an internal network really becomes a major barrier to entry, particularly as other factors like the performance of viral channels and the price of paid advertising change with the changes that Facebook is making to its platform, and the number of players in the market increases. So in general, the virtual goods model is what it's kind of what most people are focused on at this point, and there are an increasing number of competitors in the market, which is leading to new challenges that didn't really exist before. Like I was mentioning before, the as the market is getting more crowded, prices, basically the cost of user acquisition is going up, and the value of cross-promotion is going up as well. So just to quickly go over kind of what the core social gaming platforms are today in terms of where developers are thinking about spending their time. In the beginning, when the Facebook platform originally launched and subsequently the Open Social standard was created and other social networks adapted their services to the Open Social standard, and since then a couple have actually adopted the Facebook platform APIs as well. There were a lot of developers who basically attempted to deploy games on a bunch of different platforms. And this turned out to not really work because it was too hard to maintain them, and it really turned out that you actually had to do different stuff on each platform to make it work well. So most, or at least many developers have focused their efforts on Facebook over the course of the last couple of years simply because that's where the most opportunity has existed as Facebook has continued to experience really significant growth both in the U.S. and around the world. Of course, one of the challenges with that is that kind of an accepted way of life on Facebook is that the rules are consistently changing as Facebook changes its rules and attempts to better align developer incentives, user incentives, and Facebook's own incentives, as developers are often aggressively more optimizing for their own goals, which generally means spamming users too much and not thinking about the overall ecosystem in a way that really the platform needs to think about. That has created a lot of change and has necessitated that developers really rethink their methods of customer acquisition and of engagement, and has also provided opportunities for new developers to enter who are able to move more quickly and understand how things work after things change and adapt faster than older developers. And that happens regularly, and I expect that to continue to happen this year, and there will be a new CrowdStar this year. Obviously, a couple of other major elements of the Facebook ecosystem that any social game developer needs to be aware of is our Facebook Connect, which is something I'll mention a little bit more later, which I'm sure Gareth talked a lot about earlier, is simply Facebook's way of making its data available outside the site. So any website or device theoretically has access to this data and can create these same types of experiences with access to the social graph elsewhere, which creates a lot of really interesting opportunities when you think about what types of services might users want to have exist that never have really existed because the social graph wasn't accessible there or wasn't really available there, or at least one that was as high quality as Facebook's is, or at least seems to be. And obviously Facebook Credits is something that is becoming is something that Facebook is rolling out more so this year. Credits is a universal virtual currency that Facebook is creating to allow users to purchase currency directly from Facebook instead of from developers or from third-party monetization providers. And the idea here is that Facebook will be able to provide a more trusted and smooth user experience. But the challenge for developers will be that they'll have to change the way that their games work in terms of how that purchase flow looks and feels, and they'll obviously have to give up a large share, 30% to Facebook, which is higher than many of the other third-party monetization service providers are offering. So that is definitely a theme for this year as Facebook continues to roll out credits across the platform. And just as a quick note, most Facebook users are actually relatively old now. Over well over half are 25. 40% are over 35. So it's important to remember kind of the distribution of users on Facebook, as well as just how mature the platform is compared to how it was thought of even a couple of years ago. And also just important to remember is that most people are not around here. Over 70% of Facebook users are in other countries around the world. Europe has almost as many users as North America. Asia and South America have been really rapidly growing over the course of the last 12 months. And there are many, many countries in which Facebook is growing at a compound monthly rate of 10% or more, which is just a very interesting phenomenon. And many people are curious, where will Facebook fail? Where will Facebook not be able to establish dominance? And there are certainly a lot of regions around the world where, or at least a lot of markets around the world where it hasn't been able to do that. China and Russia are great examples. Brazil and India are other markets where it hasn't been the number one platform historically, but is beginning to gain a lot of ground and is seeing concave up growth for the last few months there. So there is a lot more to go into in terms of how that works locally and how mobile fits into that in different areas around the world. But it's clear that Facebook is becoming is becoming very popular in many different markets and countries around the world, and isn't just North American. A lot of people give MySpace a bad rap, and it is consistently declining in traffic, but it also continues to be the second best social gaming platform in the U.S. It monetizes well. The audience is a good fit for social games, and many developers have had success deploying similar or related types of games to MySpace users. As I mentioned before, there are a variety of other social networking platforms around the world, some of which are actually adopting the platform API. Just last week, High5 announced that it was adopting the Facebook platform API. Bebo has done the same. But for developers, really the devil is in the details in all of these things. And just because the Invite API is the same doesn't necessarily mean that your game shouldn't change. And the appropriate way to do it is still to take a more localized approach. It's certainly very challenging to deploy a service around the world and have it be localized for multiple audiences at the same time. One of the top developers recently told me that when they were doing a series of virtual goods for Christmas, all of their users in South America complained about why there was snow on them. And those types of things are things that are becoming a lot more common now as it becomes increasingly important to think in that way and to manage the back end in that way. And it's certainly not a simple operational challenge to do in a very real-time way and to decide how do I split up my services into these different operational buckets over time. Twitter is another platform that's grown a lot, but we haven't seen a lot of social gaming going on there. There have been a few experiments, but they don't really qualify in the same way, at least as the same type of category of applications or experiences to me. We've seen some interesting RPGs that have kind of come and gone, and I think that'll probably continue to be the case over the course of the next year or so. And in general, there's been a large trend of, amongst other types of gaming portals and other types of destination sites to say, well, we're a social gaming site and we're adding community features and it's the same. And I really think that a major difference or at least a major question that should be asked is, what is the value of the social graph that exists in those portals or in those forums or amongst those users versus the social graph that exists on Facebook? I think that the major value proposition that Facebook brings to the table is the actual social graph, the ability to have your sister-in-law be a waitress in your Restaurant City game, or to have your boss be on staff for you on your farm. These are types of things that actually are very important and that really play a large role in the ongoing sustenance of the game and retention rates and engagement rates over time. That it just simply provides deeper context for interaction than playing with strangers. And I don't come from a game development background, but it's my opinion that we will view the types of games where people play with strangers as much more strange and uncommon in the future than we do today, simply because most people want to play with their friends. So what's going to change in the social gaming landscape this year? Obviously, Facebook Connect is an interesting, very broad and big idea that will allow new types of things to happen that haven't happened before across platforms. So, Facebook has always said that they think about the platform not as something that exists inside a small box inside the Facebook site. And I think it's important for everyone to understand that that's how they think, and that their interests are to make Facebook data accessible to whoever wants to build services on top of them. And I think that there are going to be really big opportunities to do that both on the web and on other devices. It's still early, and it's definitely a long-term process, but thinking about what types of things never really happened that would have happened if the social graph was available is a pretty intriguing question, particularly when you think about mobile and other types of consoles and devices. There are some people who think that if I do this, I'll be less subject to the same types of constraints that exist on Facebook in terms of the viral channels and the kind of philosophy that Facebook puts on bounding how developers get to use those. But that wouldn't make sense. That would be a really confusing system. And so it's important to note that you're still subject to the same kind of viral channel rules and same ways of communicating with people. But you're simply more free to design a game experience that is more immersive and that provides just a deeper experience than can exist within the blue box. Certainly the rise of virtual goods in the West is a major business and cultural change in the last couple of years that a lot of people were wondering when it would really happen, and if North America was just somehow fundamentally culturally different than many Asian countries because we hadn't been doing it in the same way that many other countries have for years. And I think that that's really not the case. That it's more so that the products weren't right, the timing wasn't right, but that people fundamentally want to consume this type of entertainment in this way. There are a lot of people who, a lot of moms who will say, I'd much rather spend 5 hours playing Farmville or Pet Society with my son or daughter at home than spending $20 and going to see a movie, and that's a much less interactive experience. And so I think that this is kind of a fundamental type of behavior and product that will exist and that will continue to grow over the course of the next several years. And with that is, of course, coming the emergence of all of the ways to pay that actually enable you to participate in this, to consume this type of entertainment in a way that makes sense for all the different types of people who want to do that. In other places, there is a much more common set of products designed to allow prepaid microtransactions that is really just growing here. Mobile microtransactions, that's really just growing here, as well as just direct online payments. And that's one of the most interesting areas for the business community is simply who will lead virtual goods, microtransaction payments and social goods over the course of the next couple of years. And certainly there's just a rush of people who are interested in social games because they recognize that it's a good way to make money online, and that it's a potentially pretty good way to make money off of IP online in a way that hasn't really been seen before through other formats. And so not only are we seeing new startups and really advanced game designers and viral thinkers building new games and new types of applications and experiences, but we're also seeing huge media companies get into the game. There are a lot of media companies who are interested in building or buying social games or social game developers right now because it's a really strong model and because they believe that they can really bring a lot to the table in terms of the brands that people are familiar with. Once they'll say that once you get past a certain scope or size of the market, that brand really starts to make a big difference. And at that point, they believe that their assets will really give them a pretty big competitive advantage versus someone who's just creating a new title from scratch. In addition, we've continued to see a lot of casual game developers start to experiment. We've seen PopCap build some interesting games so far that haven't been focused on monetization as much as just getting people engaged, and they've been really successful. In general, we haven't seen a lot of casual games succeed on Facebook, and it's primarily due to a couple of reasons. One is they don't monetize in the same way, which presents some challenges in terms of the methodology that goes into building these types of businesses. And second, they just have different engagement characteristics. So how are people paying? So it's kind of surprising, but PayPal is actually still dominant, is still the largest source of social goods micropayments today. Makes up a substantial portion of the market. And it's interesting that they've done that, and even though they haven't rolled out any particular products over the course of the last couple of years, they're only starting to do that now. because there are so many user accounts and it's a trusted brand, more people are using it than any other service. But we're seeing the emergence of some of these alternative forms of direct payment as well that I mentioned earlier, things that have a lot of precedent around the world but just haven't been as big here. Mobile is becoming an increasingly important way for people who maybe don't want to whip out their credit card or who don't have a bank account to pay. It's surprising that the demographics amongst mobile payers are not all that different from demographics amongst people who pay through more traditional methods. It's not all kids in the way that you might think. It's a reasonably broad distribution. And we're seeing the emergence of other things in the U.S. as well. So, for example, in the last quarter of last year, Zynga, Playfish, and Playdom partnered with Incom to deploy prepaid cards into Target, and we'll see a lot more of that this year. One of the more talked about aspects of social game monetization over the course of the last few months has been, what's the deal with offers, and is this a big scam, and how important are offers both to developers as well as to players. And it is true that there's been a whittling down of the offers market over the course of the last few months as more attention has been paid to it, and that's definitely a good thing. It's also true that offers are still a small portion of the market and are still getting going, and remain to be seen if they'll be able to play a larger role over the course of time, or rather if they will play more of an on-ramp role, introducing people to their first virtual goods transaction and then getting them more hooked into the game. Once someone takes an offer and really gets into the game, there usually there isn't enough supply of attractive offers for them to really be able to fund their playing past a certain point. They have to move over to some kind of direct payment method to really continue playing the game. But it's still an important part of the market, and still plays a minority role in monetization for developers. And there are a lot of providers of ads, both traditional ad networks as well as new players who are building new products and user experiences that are bringing a lot of that inventory into the ecosystem. There's definitely been a rush of competitors to the offers and alternative payments market specifically in the last 12 months as well. We've seen maybe 10 or 15 companies who have specifically launched targeting social game developers, and this has created some interesting dynamics amongst the market. So there are a lot of developers who will switch payment providers in and out on a weekly basis. There's even one developer who's created a bidding interface for their payment providers to auction off their rev share. In terms of they'll say what the number one way to increase revenues is to renegotiate your rev share terms, and that it's kind of an unhealthy thing, but hopefully it will get better over time. And it's certainly something that will stabilize over time as the market consolidates, and will need to for it to become something sustainable and something that is built on good relationships. And this, the idea of what's happening from an organizational perspective is actually quite an interesting area in and of itself, and we could spend a long time going into this issue in particular. But one of the biggest challenges is really figuring out how to build your organization to support these kinds of services. How are things built horizontally? What types of things do you include in each studio? And we're seeing the emergence of some really large studios now at some of the larger developers, like Zynga and Playdom and Playfish. But some of the smaller developers are actually still keeping really tight teams of 3 developers and a producer and 2 designers, and are finding that they need to do that in order to move quickly enough to be able to continue to adapt their game and grow with the audience. Some developers are also taking a longer view and thinking about content months in advance. So before launching a game, having a 6 to 12 month roadmap for how they're going to keep users engaged through content over the course of time. And this is also something that's really underappreciated, I think. A lot of people will say, well, why doesn't someone just copy Farmville, or why doesn't someone just copy, the popular game of the month? And the reason is that it's really hard to support it in the same way that the most advanced developers do. It's not simply a matter of of copying the look and feel and the core mechanic, but it's also a matter of understanding how to deploy the right content to the right people at the right time at the right price, and to optimize that over time in a really intelligent way. How much time do we have? Great, we're done. So there's a lot more interesting things to talk about. Can I have 2 more minutes to just run through this? Zynga is going to have more employees than Facebook this year. They're going to be a huge business. They're going to be really hard to defend against if they decide to move into your territory. That's a big deal. Facebook is changing things frequently. How do they relate to developers? That's a big deal. The monetization landscape is changing. Credits is coming in. It's going to play it's going to drastically alter how developers monetize games and how they think about partnering with other people in the ecosystem. That's a big deal. And where will Facebook not succeed? Where will people carve out markets against Facebook that maybe they're just better able to serve a particular community, if it's teenagers in a certain country or other types of people in another type of market? Who's going to do that? Basically, I think it's going to be a really big year. It's going to be a really interesting year, and the market is going to continue to grow rapidly. All right, I'm out of time. Thanks a lot.